And the lesson of GDP, the idea that you can grow linearly and the idea you can take off and fly, completely ignores the fact that some planes crash.
Back to another episode of the Sabah Matters podcast, brought to you by Daily Express, where we bring experts, thinkers to give their opinions on why Sabah truly matters. And what we have today, I would consider a veteran and titan in Asia's financial industry. He's now currently a special advisor to the Chief Minister of Sabah, and he himself is a proud born and bred Sabahan as well. I have none other than Tan Sri Andrew Sheng here. Dexter, we are very honoured to have him.
Rest.
So where can we start? I mean, there's so much we can poke holes at. What do you want to go for?
I think maybe we should just dive right into it, Tan Sri.
Sure.
What would be the sector that is your priority at the moment for Sabah's economy growth, right? And for like your proposals, are you going to prepare them for the state government, or are they seeking your advice actively?
Well, my current thinking, my terms of reference is that the Sabah government will seek my advice from time to time.
Okay.
I will come back regularly. And if they ask me specific questions, I will give specific answers. But at this stage, because I've been away from Sabah so long, been spending a lot of time abroad and focusing largely on what I call global issues, that I think I really need to get to know Sabah better. Now, the common way I approach problems these days is something that I learned from bitter lesson, maybe about, I would say, 10 years ago. The wake-up call was basically the US-China fracture, put it this way, or you can call it rupture.
Okay.
And we saw it coming even with the first, when Trump stepped in and started using the tariff. And the question then was, the world has changed very dramatically. And the early days, the trend was clear. There was a saying that the center of gravity of the world was shifting from west to east. It didn't say exactly it had shifted already to the east, but it was shifting. The unipolar system is fragmenting. Okay, today more and more people use the word decline. I may not disagree because things move in cycles. But it became around that period, in fact, probably around 2012, 2013, I had moved because I became in charge of the founding director of the Fung Global Institute. I began to develop a global perspective and tried to use my experience working in Hong Kong, China, and my experience in World Bank, having traveled and worked in 23 countries, the last I remember, virtually every continent I went to realize that the old way of thinking was wrong. Now, there's a very common phrase that is attributed to the Israeli military historian who is a rock star writer called Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote the book called Homo Sapiens, and then he wrote a second book called Homo Deus. And it's about how human beings through AI will become more godlike because we now have machine intelligence, artificial intelligence. But there's one phrase that stuck with me. He said, artificial intelligence is mental colonization. And the way he phrased it, suddenly I realized I was mentally colonized because I grew up in Sabah. I studied English from, St. Francis, All Saints, Sabah College, then straight to university in England, all in English. Other than the sporadic classes in Chinese, I had to learn Chinese from scratch, and and so my way of thinking is English oriented. And so, as I told my young friends yesterday, in school, we knew more about English history than about Borneo history,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And it's because the history is written by the victors, not written by the losers. Those who were colonized began to subtly, in some ways, say that if you become more white, if you become more English speaking better than the English, you are accepted as English, and that's the best, as it were. And when I later worked in the World Bank, and I was trained as a English chartered accountant by an American firm, today defunct, called Arthur Andersen, and they were the best accounting firm until they made mistakes, and then collapsed, and But the idea that you are the best, you can be the best, is an ideal that. So free market is very good, rule of law is very good, democracy is very good. You level the playing field and they will come. Now that is very good in theory. But after, 1947, we're now, 2026, so roughly 80, years, right? What are the lessons of the World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions? They are not as successful as we thought they were. So when America is now running larger and larger deficits, they are facing problems, even defeating what one would normally have considered a middle power. If the best is not winning, does the rest follow the best? It's a very fundamental question. And this is not a criticism. It's your choice. But so what was wrong? So the issue has been replaced by a organic, amorphous, complex system. And we actually live in complex systems. So a human being is one of the most complex systems you can think of. It's one of the most highly evolved mammals. We have replacement parts. Everything comes in twos: 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, right, and heart with left and right chamber. Okay, so that if one fails, the other can take over. Left brain, right brain, right. So we're built for survival. So the question is, are we optimal? And the lesson of GDP, the idea that you can grow linearly and the idea you can take off and fly, completely ignores the fact that some planes crash, right? Or you go through turbulence. And so the ones that if you follow the best and the best fails, do you follow them to failure? What does that tell you? You have to think for yourself. What does MAGA mean? MAGA means America first. That means somebody else is second, right? And somebody second, somebody third, somebody fourth, somebody fifth. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with MAGA, make America great again, make America first. The same way that we think Sabah, should come first. If we are Sabahans, we should think Sabah first. And what is good for Sabah is good for Malaysia. Except if we do things that are against Malaysia, right? But we're not. We're just growing our way according to the Constitution in the best way we find how, with the cards that we are dealt with.
Okay.
So when you want to talk about the sector, this is the issue, right? So when you talk about the sector, normally you think about assets. And you subconsciously or unconsciously ignore the common factor in assets. So I'm trained as an accountant. Here's a list of assets, here's a list of liabilities. What is the asset is not in the books. Answer, human talent.
Okay.
The answer is, what does the asset produce? How is it some places gold becomes mud and other places mud becomes gold? And the answer is human beings. Right? So you have to take all factors into consideration. And then there's one other factor. If you are totally scientific, you believe in the physical environment, you believe in the mental. Now, the mental is a very big breakthrough. So for an asset, that's physical, I can feel it, Then I have a mental, which is a representation of this physical. So every positive, there's a negative. For every asset, there's a liability. The liability is a mental exercise. It's not real in a sense, but you treat it as if it's real. And then there's a derivative. When the physical interacts with the negative, the positive interact with the negative, 0, 1 in the binary, suddenly it becomes more and more complex, and complexity grows. You know, not in a linear fashion, but an explosive manner. Right? So it's just like your weeds in your garden. You just plant one plant. You just ignore it. Suddenly weeds, shoots begin to grow up. The birds come, the bees come, you know, the insects come, the snakes come, and slowly an ecosystem occurs.
Okay.
So given the fact that you now begin to think of things as organic, you suddenly realize the most important thing, what we call sustainable, is survival. It's not about efficient. If you are efficient, you can be very fast. But if you're very fast and you crash because your brakes don't work, you are not sustainable. So to some extent, the slower vehicle, the slower, being, and human beings are definitely slower than a cheetah, okay? But because it's got a brain, it survived longer than the cheetah, right?
I think some would say
Yeah.
cheetah today is the AI.
Yeah. Well, no. The AI is only a tool. So we've now invented this tool, and we've forgotten that the original AI was an algorithm, right? It's an algorithm. It's a mental thing that you learn in your head. 2 + 2 must be equal to 4. That's the algorithm. Okay, it can't be 5. It can't be 6 because you can prove, that 2 + 2 is equal to 4, right? And so that's an algorithm. But the minute it gets interaction between two persons, you are a complex person, I'm a complex person, you got 2 is to the power of 14 neurons in your head firing all the time. And I'm the same. Okay? So when we react, I'm not only watching you, I'm listening to you, I'm feeling for you. Maybe we can't exactly prove it. There's a spiritual connection, there's a historical connection, right? All these factor into our decision making. So if we can't even read the mind of you and me, if the first time we meet, how are we going to solve the problems of the world? And so the old system was very top down. The number one is top, and you guys at the bottom, you listen to me and you obey, and the system is stable. But if the top begins to crumble or weaken and cannot enforce, as we're now beginning to see, then everybody behaves in manners for which there's we call a phase transition. We're now exactly in the phase transition to a new system. So when you ask me the question, it looks very simple. Which sector would you choose?
Yeah.
Well, it's a matter of time. If you ask me, there's an old saying, right? If you want to develop, build a road. Building a road will take you 10 years. But if you want to really develop, you build your people, it'll take you 100 years. So developing the talent takes a long time. Now that's the old school, right? The new school with AI, any young kid who knows how to use the iPhone, or the smartphone has access to AI, he's immediately questioning what I'm telling you because word I mentioned, I did not know straight in. What is this? Is this the guy talking nonsense? Is it true? Is it false? Right? And all this means that knowledge is being generated at speeds which we've never had before. So the world is changing so fast. So if you say, pick the right sector, at the moment, I'm not yet ready to make that pick yet. But I will show you what my instant reaction. So I asked friends, here in Sabah, I said, if you had a sector you want to choose, which sector would you choose? The immediate reaction of people, when I first met them, I didn't know them that well, ecotourism. And to me, that is actually Sabah's natural advantage. We are a small population, we have beautiful lands, we have the highlands, okay? So we have Himalayan, almost not quite exactly Himalayan, but as you know, we are below the snow line, but we reach already a stage when there was nothing grows except rock, right? I mean, it's barren. So it's very Himalayan in that sense. And yet we have highland, and then we have real virgin jungle. And then we have the longest maritime coastline of the whole of Malaysia. So Sabah is truly blessed with natural resources, with relatively small population, and yet, as far as I know, minimum of 40 tribes. So we have the biodiversity. Our forests are very old, in some claim, even older than Amazon, right? So we have a lot of geospatial history for which we may have only just begun to sort of tease out.
Because, Tan Sri, you mentioned how assets of people, you speak it in a way that it's not just a pool of labor, but a pool of talent, right?
Yes.
But oftentimes talent is not able to be channeled effectively. And let's consider Sabah's situation here. Because I remember Jeffrey Williams was quite critical of how not just Sabah, but Malaysia in general operates very much with a lot of state intervention, right? And a lot of that state involvement creates a lot of opacity, sometimes rent-seeking, and Sabah's development has historically been dependent on state-linked entities and public intervention. So I don't want to be dichotomous here, but how could Sabah strike that balance between cultivating private enterprise, but at the same time state leadership as well? Because as I'm sure classically it would be, the neoliberal approach would always be the best, which is let the free market reign, but where do you find the balance?
Well, human beings are always tribal. Let's be blunt about this. Problems of Africa is also tribes. Who spoiled them? The colonials drew straight lines right across, ignore river, ignore mountain ranges, ignore deserts, straight line across. And so they have difficulty growing from tribal towards nationalism. Malaysia is more lucky. We have lots of natural resources, lots of water, lots of food, right? And so the most difficult part is building institutions. Now, there are two types of institutions. There is traditionally known as the government institution, which are basically under the English system. The chancery is basically the household finance minister for the royalty. Okay? Right? And master of the bench is the chief judge. I mean, things like that, right? So the system has always been between the state and the market.
Yeah.
Now, the concept of the market is only since Adam Smith, in one sense, which is 1776. That's when he wrote the Wealth of Nations, right? The Wealth of Nations and the private sector. So that became embedded in capitalism that one tended to forget the whole purpose of wealth is to have human happiness, not for the sake of wealth by itself, right? Because if you just go for wealth and you destroy your environment, are you happy? You're not happy. So the issue between the state and the market, the private sector and the public sector, is a historical, archetypes, two different models. There are no such thing as totally private markets, nations that are totally private market. You have, in that sense, you have so-called minimal government, and then in the so-called autocracy, you have totally maximalist government. But today, everything is mixed. Okay? So, as you know, when I was at the World Bank, it was against the Washington consensus to talk about industrial policy. Oh, government must not choose. When I went to Hong Kong, it was talking about positive intervention. The government does not know what to choose. The market will know what to do. Okay? So, but they actually fit different environments. So what is one man's meat is another man's poison. So the idea of what is best may be best for some, but cannot be best for everybody. So now what we should now think about is not best practice, but best fit. What fits your local condition?
Yeah.
Okay.
The conditions where it works in a desert economy, which is most of large parts of Middle East, is very different from a jungle economy that exists in Sabah, for example. But even within Sabah, we have coastal tribes, right? And then we have, high altitude, people who live higher up and people who live in the real jungle. So, and then we have people who live in the city. So different people have different models. And it's times for us to develop. So so what essentially happened under the British, because the British attitude was, I came, I saw, I conquered, and therefore the land is all mine, and therefore I can let it to the private sector because we're all British, and the profits of the British merchant, the trader, the estate, ultimately pays tax to the British Chancery. Well, if you lose your jobs here because you can't compete against a British manufacturer, too bad.
Okay.
Right? And that's what happened to India, right? The Indian manufacturing, which was in the textile industry, which was glorious when, people tend to forget this, okay? At a time when the British occupied or conquered India, India GDP was nearly 1/4 of the world. When the British left and India became independent, it was 4% of world GDP. Now, is that a wealth creation or a wealth destruction? Right? So to a large extent, but the British hated state-owned enterprises. But they created the first one, which was the British
East India Company.
Yes.
Not the first one, the second one. The first one was the Dutch East Indian Company, right? And you must remember this, the Dutch East Indian Company and the British East Indian Company was for ruthless exploitation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good for shareholders, but very bad for the people who work for the issues. So how do we find that balance? And therefore, when it comes down to people, the first, in my class, which was in Sabah College, the second class that started taking O-levels, by which time the first class that went to sixth form started getting the Shell Scholarship, the Colombo Plan scholarships, the Commonwealth scholarships to go abroad. Out of my class, which finished sixth form, okay, there were 24. 19 of them got doctorates, either physical doctor or PhDs. Only 5 did not get. I was amongst that 5. And you can count on your hand how many people stayed back. Because amongst them were double doctorates, Cambridge, physicists, top engineers, right? Very good doctors, most of them working abroad.
Okay.
So the education system, if it was not suited to Sabah's conditions, you might as well send them away, right?
So I think that's one of the major issues we're facing is the brain drain, right? So how can we bring our talents back to Sabah? You mentioned assets, human talent is one of Sabah's assets, right? But if we are seeking opportunities elsewhere, how can we bring them back in? And how can we change the mindset locally? Because a lot of local companies and GLCs, the issue is that they are too comfortable, too lazy, right? So how can we address all these issues rather than sit and wait for opportunities to come? How can we bring talents back to Sabah and change the local mindset, right?
Well, I am not worried about Sabah's diaspora. As you know, who is benefiting to a large extent for many poor countries from the diaspora? Philippines is a classic example. Philippines itself is not that wealthy, but every year, if I'm not wrong, their diaspora outside are remitting money back to Philippines, raising families, building the kampong house, building the cities, creating the new jobs, huge. But most of them went to America, and then the others went in service industry, the rest of the world. But the education mattered quite a lot. You see this now, the Indian diaspora is basically trained previously in Britain, now in America, and they're taking over the high tech, the medical, all that. And sooner or later, they will begin to go back. In the same way that the Chinese went back, the Koreans went back, the Taiwanese went back, and they built the high tech industry. First, the Japanese were always slightly protective. The Koreans were very nationalistic, the Taiwanese for their own reason, right? So built their own tech industries. So today, they are the wealth creators, okay, through technology. Whereas resource-rich countries like Argentina, large parts of Africa, Nigeria, very resource-rich. They have more oil than everybody else. They are having difficulty going up. They have what is difficult, including Malaysia, right? We have been in the just below the advanced income status for nearly 20 years. And even though our ringgit GDP grows, in dollar terms, because the ringgit has depreciated against the dollar until very recently, we've slipped back a little bit. And so my conclusion is that, in order to break the middle income trap, it's a mental trap. Unless you are willing to sacrifice in the same way that our badminton players had to compete like hell with each other, get paid, get trained, lose, and eventually slowly build up the team, the coaches, the infrastructure, build the ecosystem for world-class players. Previously, we had very natural talent. They came from wealthier families, they were urban, right? And then slowly this started to spread. And then they started competing in the Thomas Cup and all that. And then suddenly they found, Indonesians, many more than them. And then after the Indonesians, the Chinese were many more than them. That's how they started changing. And yet, Japan, can become global badminton champions. Sweden, Denmark can be global badminton champions. Why? Talent, practice, and hard work, and competition. Right? So now we need to start thinking about how to groom such talent for our own purposes. The advantage of the diaspora is that those who have worked abroad come back, may be reflected on what they learned, what may not be right. And if they begin to appreciate, if you expect today to immediately to create a Finland of ASEAN, not possible, not that fast, right? So that's where the education begins at home. And so if we educate, properly, and we head in the right direction, I think we have a great chance of success.
Okay. I'm picking up a lot of sense of, I would say, localized approaches. We have to, like you said, best fit, not best practice, but best fit. And it reminds me of how, Mersheimer predicted this a long time ago, that the neoliberal international order was unsustainable because it doesn't take into account localities, nationalism, and local nuances, right? So would you say that maybe in, 20 years, 30 years down the line, we will break apart from that unipolar system and you would see smaller multipolar arrangements where, maybe in the case of Sabah, right? Sarawak is becoming very regionalist. Would you see that Sabah should also look towards becoming a bit more regionalist in the sense that, yes, we need to go our own way within the federation and just create our own particular method, because it seems that the federal government, they have a very, application of things like the NEP, Bumiputra and all that. It just doesn't seem to work for geography like Sabah, where there's low population density. You have to travel to jungles here and there inside the hutans to go to the kampungs, right? We cannot be centralized now, can it, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that, Tan Sri?
Well, you see, the Washington consensus was very simple. Think global, act global. The reality today, you can think globally, but you act locally. Right? Because all change is local. What do I mean by this? Mr. Trump is clearly the most powerful man in the world because of the American global reach. But in reality, he only controls the people around him. He controls his cabinet. Okay? And maybe because he has influence over the media, he also controls the right wing of the Republican Party and a large section that believes in him for him to vote himself in. But his immediate powers are local. He actually affects the people. So he would tell his Minister of Defense, Minister of State, etc., to do what he would like to happen, right? Now, but the Americans have built a very complex system around. It's like a new Rome. There's a new Rome bureaucracy built around. So you look at the Pentagon, you look at the White House, they're Roman columns, right? They got the Egyptian Sphinx, they're all symbols of Roman power, right? They're the new Rome. So to that extent, we tend to forget, just like the Roman Empire started to fray when they started hiring Visigoths, they allowed border people to come in, right? And suddenly, these guys learned Roman weaponry, Roman tactics, and started conquering. And then the Roman soldiers can no longer fight because they're used to mercenaries hiring people to do things. So we see these changes, right? And the people who adapt survive. The people who don't adapt will decline. And what we learn today is so clear. With rapid technology growing so fast, with climate change going so fast, technology growing so fast, within my generation, the population of the world went up 4 times from 2 billion to 8 billion. My generation. Okay? We saw this, right? So things are changing at a speed that you can never dream about. And so suddenly you get people literally moving. What is Malaysia's fundamental problem? A whole generation of rural youth moving into cities and not finding it that easy to adjust. Okay. Right? And how do we create jobs for them? How do we pay them meaningful jobs? Okay, we solve the problem by saying, let's import more foreigners. But the more you import the foreigners, the lower the gaji becomes. Your youth is not going to work for that kind of gaji.
And like you said, they'll take those skills and bring it back to their home country.
That's right. So then, you are now so used to these companies. So when they threaten, I want to move somewhere because you don't give me the job. Okay, we import more. But the more you import, the less the people get jobs, the more they become dissatisfied. Right? So we temporarily solve this through the gig workers. But how much technology is there in the gig workers other than the app? Right? So, and yes, it's very useful if you got temporary, you're short of, you're on holiday for 2 days and you don't mind working 1 extra day for some spare cash. Fair enough. You got your car is already in the garage not using, you can go to the gig and you earn some money. That's good. You're using up spare capacity. But ultimately, the real strength is to empower your youth for the next generation's challenges. Right? You cannot delay and train them immediately for today's challenges. And today's challenges is a huge opportunity and also a huge threat. Look at every single public listed company in the major companies in the United States. Every time they announce record profits, they announce they're going to cut how many staff. So the people are unhappy. GDP is going up, but the people are unhappy. And why are they unhappy? Because they think they're going to lose their jobs. Right? So how do we now reskill? I'm not talking about even just reskilling. In Penang, which is the 6th largest semiconductor, advanced manufacturing center in the world, which has, 80% multinational, one of the most crucial issue is not about training graduates or undergraduates or tech staff. It is to retrain your existing staff.
Okay.
Because by the time you wait for the university to produce a student, too late already. You don't have time. Because tomorrow, if the tariff change, the supply chain has to be reconfigured.
Okay.
Right? And your strategy has to be extremely flexible, which means your staff needs to be extremely flexible. So we're now going up a hyper-speed, hyper-scale transformation, which means that those people who grab this new tool will be winners, and those people who don't learn are going to be losers. So I always use this phrase of mine, my favorite phrase, either eat lunch or be lunch.
Okay. So when you mention Penang, right, first thing that comes to people's minds is, of course, semiconductors. When you mention Sabah, first thing comes to people's minds is, of course, tourism, right? So should Sabah branch out into other things? Like, for example, I've spoken to some people in Peninsular Malaysia and Singapore. They said Sabah should consider to set up their own financial center. Do you think this is a good idea? I mean, from your experience in Singapore and Hong Kong, what do you think? Is Sabah ready for this?
Well, somebody in Penang also asked me whether Penang should be a financial center. The answer is, in Malaysia, the official policy is very clear. Kuala Lumpur is the only financial center, and Labuan is the only offshore financial center. But Malaysia itself, being a relatively small country, would find it difficult to compete globally on scale. However, since we were one of the first pioneers to start into the Islamic finance area, and we have a very large Islamic banking system, the question is whether we can now produce the critical mass in the Islamic finance. But the issues are, the opportunities are very clearly there. But the question is, what is the business opportunity? And it's there where I think the traditional economist training doesn't teach you that, because the traditional classical economics is that as long as there are free markets, as long as transactions costs are zero, cost of information is free information everywhere, everybody can win, then there's one optimal solution. But the reality is, even America, who used to believe in free trade, now believes in industrial policy, government intervention. Okay. Right? So if America is doing this, and they're willing to subsidize their company, and China is willing to subsidize their company, Saudi Arabia is willing to subsidize the company, Malaysia's budget is limited, where are we going to finance in this area?
Okay.
And so we come back to your first question. Where do we choose? Who do we back as the winner who will come back and help us produce the next winner? Because if I am in the oasis and I have no salt, if I have no salt, I have water, I have dates, I have vegetables, I have some fruit, no problem. I have no salt. And if I have no salt, I would slowly die, right? So I have to go out of the oasis to get salt and other goods and services that I don't get. So what do? I have to finance my caravan to cross the desert and meet all kinds of risks. So ultimately, it is about picking winners. You cannot avoid taking risks. So Islamic finance is all about risk and equity. Equity means risk sharing. You win, I win. You lead the caravan, you get a certain share. You are partner in the caravan, you will not cheat us because we are all partners. Okay? Right? And I've been sitting in the oasis, I finance both of you. You rugi, I rugi. Okay? That's fine. That's acceptable. That's a very fair system. Which is why, to a large extent, our ability to face risk in a world of uncertainty is the biggest challenge ever. So when we see that there is wealth inequality, the principle of zakat is actually those who are wealthy must help the poor. And that's what we should be doing. We should actually, people who make money should also help those who don't, right? Now, if we completely delegate to government, and the government is not able to reach the poor for whatever reason, sometimes inefficiency, sometimes lack of knowledge, sometimes, just sheer distance. Okay? But the poor remain poor, they're going to vote in a very different manner.
Okay.
So we now have feedback mechanisms for which, Sabah as a growing society in a more and more complex world is learning. So I have three simple words which I, in thinking about the future conference that we're holding in July 13, 14, I try to reduce complexity to simplicity. Because if you tell the people a very complex story, they don't get it. That's very simple. Who is this guy talking something I don't understand? So I asked myself, what is the plant in Sabah that has survived billions of years? And the answer is the fern.
Okay.
Now the fern grows and has survived, according to what AI tells me or Google, whatever tells me, 360 million years. This is, dinosauric age. It survived. It survived because it actually is what looks like a very simple plant, but it emerges being curled up, and then it turns slowly in a very strict mathematical form, which in sophisticated mathematics is called Fibonacci rule, the series.
The golden ratio, right?
The golden ratio. Okay? The conch also is like that. That's a very natural ratio. It's about turning, it's about learning, and it's about earning. Now, why does it survive? Because it has very deep root that can penetrate rock, sand, stone to go to water that normal plants can't grow. So it can grow in very hardy soil, even with shortage of rain, right? It sends out not seeds, it sends out spores, millions of them. And the wind blows and all the spores grow all over the mountain and grow in everywhere. So it survives. So the turn, learn, and earn. Why does it earn? Because if it does not earn, it cannot survive.
So are you saying, Tan Sri, Sabahans should act more like the fern in order for us to survive?
Sabahans now, in order to thrive, must learn first to survive. And our people have survived. We've gone through very hard times.
Correct. Yes.
And when you go through very hard times, there is only one way out.
Up. I mean, it's great wisdom, Tan Sri, because I want to pick up on a personal point here, because you went from a Bretton Woods institution, you worked at the World Bank, where classical economics, neoliberal market was, in a way, king in terms of ideology, right? What was the inflection point for you to come out and say, no, we need to look towards more localized approaches? What was the turning point for you?
Well, the turning point happened because they had a wonderful, the World Bank was a creation of the Americans. It was not the baby of John Maynard Keynes. In those days, the most brilliant of the British economists, Cambridge economists. The guy who's invented GDP and all that, national accounting, all this, Keynes was the one who got it. But the people who mathematicized, quantified economics were Americans. And so they were the ones who, like, Kenneth Arrow, Samuelson and all this, won all the Nobel laureates, right? And they were mathematicians, physicists who went into economics and simplified the world into this very complete system. But these simplified mechanical system then become ideologized into a more and more rigid axioms. Free market. Washington Consensus was about free markets, rule of law, democracy, free flow of capital. Okay? And then when they allow free flow of capital, governments collapsed. Exchange rate crises, right? Banking system failed. So, no, I mean, they're not supposed to fail. If the free market really works, they're not supposed to fail. So they created an independent organization called the central bank to manage the money, to protect the banks. And then they created a problem because the more you protect the market, the more the market does not behave according to market terms. Because they say if granddaddy central bank is willing to bail me out, I can make no mistake. So how many bankers went to jail since the 2008 crisis? The answer is zero. Everybody retired to Cayman Islands with bigger bonuses, right? So why is the bubble getting higher and higher? It's because nobody's afraid of it. Because they always think, right, that the Fed will bail them out. Now, that may not be true, but would the politicians and the central bank not bail out in the event there was a big crash? We shall see. So the turning point for me, I was sent to the World Bank because I was involved in handling the deposit-taking cooperative finance company crisis in Malaysia. I wrote a paper about it. And then they say, okay, we've got a worldwide problem. It's exactly like a plague of commercial banks losing money. Please go and have a look. I wrote a book on it. I made 8 case studies, and my conclusion was half the problems, more than half of the banking problems were political problems. Mm-hmm. Now, World Bank says we don't get involved in politics. But actually, the ideology was political. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so the minute I suddenly realized, whoa, it may not fit. And then I saw the opportunities in East Asia. At that time, East Asia China was reforming, Hong Kong was just, returning back to China. And then they said, you have some central banking experience, come and work for us. I said, wow, if an American can become head of the futures exchange in Hong Kong, a Brit can become the head of the whatever, why can't I be? So I joined Hong Kong. And so there was a mindset change. Now, in Hong Kong, my mindset did not change. But it was the Asian financial crisis which shook my confidence. Okay? We thought we were high savers. We were hardworking. Okay, some of us got a little bit crazy. And then, it happened. But, the thing that, because I worked in the World Bank, I worked a lot with the IMF people. They came to Malaysia and they said, Malaysia, you're okay, you need to adjust here a little bit. They went to Thailand, said, your exchange rate is slightly out of line, but you're still fundamentally okay, And then Indonesia, the same thing, bang, 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 Philippines did not suffer from the Asian crisis because we were already in ICU. It had an IMF program, right? And so, Thailand devalued only slightly, boom. It was a full-fledged crisis. And then suddenly everybody sold out of Malaysia and Indonesia. Then Indonesia had to bite the bullet. It was political crisis. It started as what nobody focused on, but it really was a political transition crisis. President Suharto was on his last term in some sense because his own health, his family was, engagement and all that. So the policies started going a little bit wonky, and then there was a flight out of the rupiah, and then the crisis came. So first, Bangkok, then Jakarta, then Malaysia was hit, then, Malaysia implemented exchange control, and then the Americans even then did not step in. They just said, IMF, World Bank, you just handle it. And then South Korea happened.
Okay.
So I asked a very good analyst friend. I said, why did the Americans intervene in South Korea and did not rescue Thailand? Thailand was where the American base was, and the main base in the Vietnam War. And the answer, you mustn't forget. This American was very smart. He said, you must remember, America has 50,000 troops in South Korea. If South Korea fails, the geopolitical situation would change. So America intervened to help South Korea. South Korea literally in a year, more or less recovered, right? So it goes to show the IMF, the World Bank were in those days in the mode of saying, you got sick, it's the victim's problem. And I said, this is not. This is something more than a victim. This is actually contagion.
Okay.
And so now we know it is the transmission of fear, right? And sure enough, in the 2008, 10 years later, the Americans suffered from the same problem. But they suffered it from the subprime and the derivative area. And then not only that, because the European financial system were borrowing dollars to invest in the derivative market, they also got killed when the subprime happened and the chain reaction after Lehman occurred. So instead of being just an American crisis, it became a European crisis. And the European crisis then became a European debt crisis, right? So, but the reforms after 2008, surprisingly, the Europeans took the cautious route. The Americans just cleaned up the banking system, didn't punish bankers, but clean it up and just say move on, right? And then they had the .com, which was a technology, and today they have the big AI bubble.
Okay. So when you talk about intervention, maybe we can go to a local case study. Recently in the news, our ports, they face these congestion issues, right? Which affected a lot of businesses, of course, and the logistics sector. So in order for Sabah to be a regional hub, right, based on your past experience, Tan Sri, in Hong Kong and China, let's take this case study, all right, and work around it. How can we improve our port system? How could we step things up to solve these sort of issues based on what you've seen in Hong Kong and China?
Well, I think the British, when they built Hong Kong and Singapore, they were maritime powers. So for them, the idea of free trade centers served both military, trade, and financial purposes. And the British also understood infrastructure must be done as cheaply as possible, but as robust as possible. Okay? So you notice the Roman roads
Still
are very
stand together.
straight. They're very straight, standard gauge, very straight. British road, goyang, right? And because they brought it very cheaply. But because they were very mercantile, they were profit-oriented, they do maintain the infrastructure and they privatize the ports. Okay, so let's not talk about Singapore first. Let's talk about Hong Kong, which I know a little bit better. Hong Kong ports were basically privatized. It used to be for Wheelock Marden, then became Hutchinson, then Lee Ka-shing took over, then they basically privatized. And then later on, they allowed competition by allowing the Chinese port operators also to come in, right? So made the private win, even though there was a certain amount of kind of oligopoly in this area, because even the operators know, Hong Kong's survival as a trade center is critical, and the infrastructure cannot go wrong. Now, Sabah is a very rich place. We made money from timber, then we made money from palm oil, then we made money from oil. We never made money from ports, right? And I don't know the full story yet. Our timber people invested in shipping, but maybe they concentrated on the shipping to Japan and customers, and less on the regional feeder stuff. So when the cabotage policy was introduced, the feeder system, added some costs. But I understand the policy been removed. So there's some complications to this. And so that's when I say the best fit must occur. Why do I say this? I recently went to palm oil area, and the road up to the government road, up to the palm oil estate, the gate was completely destroyed. It was relatively new. And they put a toll gate up there. Inside is all private. And the road was very good. And I asked, why is this the case? And the answer is illegal logging trucks carrying heavy stuff. However good road, not built to standard. The best British standard was not designed for logging truck load that are 3 times capacity or whatever it is. I'm just using a number, right? So the result is, for the sheer profit of taking 3 logs overloaded out, I destroy the road and everybody loses. So the maintenance costs become very high. Then you have to go and apply for a budget again, and you know how complicated it is to get the budget to replace the road. So you get into an infrastructure kind of infrastructure gap trap, right? And Sabah is now in that area. So if you really look at energy, water, electricity is a very classic area. Electricity, water, right? Roads, ports. Plane is pretty good. Kota Kinabalu is number 3 now. But the infrastructure is definitely behind that in Semenanjung. Right? So to some extent, we need now a strategy that fits Sabah conditions, in which we have to design and maintain to our specifications, rather than apply, as you know, building codes date from the British times. So not all of them have been changed. And these specifications, etc., may have to be thought through, right? Because like electricity, you cannot design, I design like this. Actually, you need to design with a safety margin above the peak load. And if you are very close to the peak load, that's why you get brownouts. We have brownouts, if I'm not recall, something maybe 6 times higher than the Semenanjung area, right? Electricity interruptions. In terms of time, in terms of time. So there are all these issues add up to costs. And so if you want to attract manufacturing, you have to have lower costs, cheaper energy, more constant supply of water, better roads, better shipping, the whole lot line. And then, of course, better talent. The workers must be able to fit these new areas. So all these are fairly complex stuff. And so maybe time for somebody step back a little bit and think a little bit more about this.
Step back, think a bit, restructure, look at the structural issues, right? Perhaps that is one of the purposes of the Sabah Asia Pacific Impact Investing Summit that will be held this July. Tan Sri, could you talk to us more about that? Just explain to our audience so that they can be a bit more interested.
Sure. Now, as you know, if we take it at a very high level first, the very high level is that we know that climate change, 60 years ago, 1973, 74, there was a Club of Rome. And it said the Earth is now consuming resources faster than the Earth can. There are limits to growth. The title was called Limits to Growth. At the moment, we are consuming Earth maybe 4 times the planet can actually generate. So clearly, we need to think about how to recycle, reuse, pollute less, and deal with this. So the United Nations faced this problem. So they announced this Sustainable Development Goals. Wonderful slogan. And then they came out with 17. The 17 Development Goals was supposed to be implemented by 2030. We are now 2026. We have achieved by the United Nations own emission maximum 18%. 18%.
2-3 goals at least.
Yeah. I mean, not the material ones, right? So the question is, and very clearly, Sabah is clearly in that situation. And we have crazy situations like, which is fantastic for Sabah. And I praise Sabahans for this. We are carbon negative. We are not even carbon zero. We are carbon negative. We capture more carbon than we grow out. That's because we've got lots of jungle, and marine reef and all that. But in order to get the carbon credit, that's not enough. You have to capture even more because you're allowed to capture more before you can get a carbon credit. So now we have to learn how to jump the hoops in order to comply with all this. And this one, because, if you ask the Kampong people to do this, and let's say I can capture 20 tons of carbon a year, let's say a maximum of, today some of it is $10 US or $20 US. In Europe, it may be $70 to $80, right? It's not worthwhile. So clearly, you also need a mechanism to consolidate this. So one of the reasons for the conference is impact investing in sustainable development goals. So how do you use Sabah as the living lab for showing the world how we can achieve this? Okay? We have the perfect environment for it. We are now at a stage when a lot of people care about the environment. You just go to Kematan, you would see the pride in the environment, in our culture, in our biodiversity. That's great. The willingness to change is there. But how do we do it? It's, again, as I said, AI stands for aspiration versus implementation, impact, right? So how to do it is really the issue. So what the whole idea of the conference is bring people together, think this through. We're not just bringing outsiders who may want to invest in Sabah. We want to bring people who have been in the area of carbon, been in the area of social stock exchange, have done it before, meet our local people. Hopefully our local people can work with them, cooperate with them, learn from them, and then do the turning and the earning. Right? Okay. And that you just have to try. And you have to take the risk. Now, I always say this, right? There is no success without failure. So we need to go into eyes with our eyes wide open. We need to try. We need to experiment. We hope this conference or summit will be the first of many. If more and more people, come to Sabah and say they love the place, they would like to invest in this place, or they would like to help the people by just donating to the NGOs or the villagers, it will make a huge difference.
Okay.
I think that covers a whole breadth of topics. So we went from global issues to local, global, back to local. But I guess that's the interplay that Tan Sri, you always keep trying to provoke here, is that local can be global as well, right?
That's right.
And don't let global infect the local, essentially, right?
That's right. That's
so I'm happy that we had this conversation because it did really open my eyes to how we do have the freedom to experiment with how we want to take Sabah. Oftentimes we meander with the status quo, with what we feel is tried and tested, and we don't really have the courage to take the risk and just try something new and see what sticks with us. And I'm glad that we had Tan Sri to illuminate us on the matter. So if you are interested, please show your support. If you can attend the summit, please let it be known and give your opinions as well, because I'm pretty sure Sabah, there are a lot of locals here who have shown the capability and the talent to actually actualize this kind of more localized forms of development. But that's it. If you do enjoy this episode, please comment down below, and if you would like to have Tan Sri back over for another episode, also please let us know. So that's another episode from the Sabah Matters podcast. We will catch you on the next one. Thank you for now and goodbye.
Thank you both so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Tan Sri.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri.